Darkness. Silence. Then, the slow blink of consciousness. Elias Wren, once a reclusive writer battling depression and insomnia, wakes to find himself not in a hospital, nor a dream, but in a room with 3 walls white, smooth, seamless. There is no ceiling, no door, and no windows. The 4th side is an open void, endless black stretching into nothingness. The room is still, clinical in its sterility. But it is the 3rd wall, the one directly in front of Elias, that breaks the pattern. Unlike the static white of the others, this wall shimmers faintly, like water held vertical. When Elias stares at it, it changes. Sometimes subtly, sometimes violently. It pulses red when his heart races. It turns gray when despair overtakes him. It blooms briefly with soft colors when he remembers her, Sophia, though her face remains blurred. The wall reflects, but not as a mirror does. It reflects what Elias feels, not what he sees. And more disturbingly, it begins to show things Elias doesn't remember, snapshots of an apartment he doesn't recall living in. Flashes of a fire, a screaming child, a woman's silhouette leaving a hospital room. He shouts into the room, hoping someone hears. No one answers. But the wall ripples. He touches it. It is neither warm nor cold, neither solid nor liquid, but it responds like skin under breath. Panic sets in. He screams, pounds on it. The wall turns deep red, then black. And then, it breathes. Unsure of time, Elias begins testing the wall with thought, with silence, with memory. When he speaks aloud, the wall echoes not with his voice, but with phrases from old therapy sessions. Lines from stories he once wrote. When he closes his eyes and forces calm, it dims, settles, becomes translucent. He sees shadows moving beyond it, his own, others. The room becomes a mirror maze of his psyche. Days may pass, or hours. Time has no anchor here. At one point, the wall shows a version of Elias younger, thinner, eyes brighter, but lost. That version of him stares back. It mouths a word Elias can't hear. He tries to write it into the floor with his fingernail. The word vanishes. So does the image. As the wall continues to adapt, Elias begins to realize this isn't a room he was put into. It is a room built by him, for him. The wall is not a barrier. It's a metaphor. A construction of every fear, denial, and fracture he's never addressed. But knowing that doesn't free him, not yet. Because he understands the rule now. To leave this place, he must break the wall. And to break the wall, he must first break himself. The room had no clocks, but time still passed. Elias felt it in the weight behind his eyes, in the patterns of his breath, in the ache of memory that refused to sleep. The 3rd wall continued its strange ballet of transformations. Sometimes it was liquid, sometimes it was glass. Other times, it seemed to inhale when he exhaled, a reflection more intimate than a mirror. The whispers began on what Elias imagined was the 3rd day. At first, they were vague, static murmurs, like radio signals bouncing through fog. Then, they grew clearer, his own voice, but younger, sharper, more cynical. It spoke in riddles, in mockery, in truth. You lied to her. You knew what would happen. You left him there. The wall flickered with each sentence, displaying images that vanished too fast to hold, a hallway lined with hospital lights. A figure hunched over a desk, hands shaking. The child appeared during the 4th cycle of waking. At first, Elias thought it was a memory, the way you dream of someone long lost, and your heart fills before your brain doubts. The child stood behind the wall, mimicking his posture. When Elias lifted his hand, the boy did too. But then, the mimic broke. The child tilted his head, blinked slowly, and mouthed a word, liar. From that moment on, the wall no longer showed memories, it showed possibilities. Regrets. Realities that could have happened, had Elias chosen differently. One scene showed Sophia, sitting beside a hospital bed where Elias lay unconscious, but this time, she stayed. In another, Elias published the book he abandoned halfway. In one terrifying vision, he was the one in flames, not his brother. He began bleeding from his palms during one of the hallucinations. In the vision, he smashed a mirror in a therapist's office. In the room, his fists were clean, but the blood trickled anyway. The wall turned black afterward, absorbing all light. The child vanished. Elias screamed until his voice broke, but silence folded over the sound like a shroud. Desperate for meaning, Elias began to mark the white walls, writing what he remembered, sketching what he saw. The markings disappeared within hours, erased by an unseen hand. Only the third wall retained its memory. It never showed the same image twice. He began to wonder, was he in a coma? Dead? Dreaming? But the wall did not answer. Instead, it became a mouth. Not literal, but implied. A curve formed in the center, like lips parting without teeth. And a voice came, not his, not the child's, but someone older, worn, soft like velvet drawn over bone. "You are not trapped here," it said, "you are buried." Elias backed away, trembling. "What does that mean?" he whispered. The wall rippled. A single word appeared on its surface, carved in fire. Confess. The confession didn't come easily. Elias sat for hours or maybe days staring at the wall, waiting for something to shift. The word confess still glowed faintly in its center, pulsing like a heartbeat. He tried speaking, apologies, half-truths, journal entries recited from memory. Nothing happened. The wall remained still. Then he remembered something his last therapist once said. A confession that avoids pain isn't confession, it's rehearsal. So Elias began again. He spoke about the night of the accident, not just the collision, but the thoughts that preceded it. The deliberate way he reached for the wheel to swerve. How he hadn't felt fear, only relief. How in that split second, he thought maybe this would be the thing to end the numbness. The wall cracked. Not visibly, but audibly. A sound like a deep chime echoed through the room. Then it shifted, showing a new image, the twin. Elias's brother Isaac stood on the other side. Older than Elias remembered him. Not the boy from the fire, but a man fully grown. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired. He didn't speak. He just looked. Elias collapsed. Tears came not sudden, not explosive, but slow and hot, like sap from a dying tree. "It should have been me," he said, over and over. The wall flickered with flashes from the fire bedroom, smoke, a hallway, Isaac pounding on a locked door. "You locked it," Elias whispered. The wall pulsed again. Isaac moved closer. "No," Elias corrected. "I locked it." The wall cracked a second time, this time visibly. A thin fracture formed, running top to bottom. The void beyond it pulsed like a storm contained. That night, Elias dreamt of the room from above. The 3 white walls, the black floor, the third wall glowing. He was inside and outside at once, watching himself curl in the corner. In the dream, someone sat beside him, an older version of himself, gaunt but calm. "You were never meant to survive," the older Elias said. "You were meant to remember." Elias woke to the sound of dripping water, but there was no leak. He looked at his hands wet with ink. The ink bled from his fingertips, black and thick, staining the white floor. He crawled to the third wall and pressed his palms against it. Where the ink touched, words appeared. "I didn't want to live." The wall accepted it. The fracture widened. Wind, cold and metallic, began to blow from the crack. It whispered, "You can leave. But only one of you may walk out." The twin appeared again. Not behind the wall, beside him. "You buried me," Isaac said. "But we both died. One of us has to rise." Elias looked at the wall. Then at his twin. And he understood what the choice truly meant. Elias no longer knew how long he had been in the room. Time had stopped functioning in any linear sense. The white walls, once static and solid, now bent and curved like warped glass, as though the room itself were breathing with him. Or perhaps in defiance of him. Sleep became a concept, not a necessity. Food, water, touch, none of it existed anymore. Only the room, only the void, and the third wall, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the racing spiral of his thoughts. The wall had become more than a surface. It was alive with memory, saturated with sensation. Every flicker of fear or guilt rippled across it. a living canvas of Elias's crumbling psyche. He began to understand. Each of the three walls symbolized something more than architectural boundary, denial, shame, pain. But the third wall, fluid, reactive, cruel and honest, was something else entirely. It was him, not just a reflection of his pain, but a living embodiment of the fragmented, buried self he had spent years running from. The part that remembered everything, that kept the ledger of every failure, every betrayal. Every time he chose silence over truth. In a desperate act of will, Elias scrawled the words, "I am," across the third wall. Inked in his own blood and tears. The wall shimmered and responded with two words, "I was." The phrase echoed around the room, dissonant and final, as if mocking his fragile grasp on identity. The implication struck him like cold water. Who he was had already died in the accident, or perhaps long before it. What remained was a shell echoing a former self. That night, or what passed for night, the twin appeared again, no longer distant, no longer ethereal. He was Elias and he was not. "One of us has to stay broken," the twin said gently, "so the other can leave." Elias felt the truth in those words, the cruel clarity of sacrifice. To be whole, something had to be left behind. The broken pieces could not walk out with him. The third wall changed. It showed him a door. An actual, tangible door, glowing faintly with pale golden light. But next to it was a condition, a wall etched with every phrase, every image, every version of Elias that had ever existed inside this room. If he wanted to open the door, he had to erase them all. Everything he had written. Everything he had confessed. Everything that had made him feel real. To step through the door would be rebirth, but not without cost. To free himself from the room, he would have to kill what he believed made him human. Liberation would mean annihilation or something greater. He placed his hand on the first mark and began to erase. Elias erased the first mark slowly, his hand trembling as his fingers smeared away the inked name, his own. As he continued, a low hum began to rise from the third wall, like the sound of breath drawn across a wound. One by one, he removed every phrase he'd carved into the room, his apologies, his failures, the desperate affirmations of identity. With each erasure, the light in the room dimmed, and a new sensation took hold, not fear, not pain, but silence. A complete and consuming stillness. When the final mark was gone, the wall turned pure white. Blank. Empty. Elias stood before it, not knowing if he'd destroyed himself or uncovered something buried beneath all the noise. The door remained, pulsing gently like a heartbeat at rest. His twin was gone. No apparition, no echo, no trace. The choice was his alone. He stepped forward. The moment his hand touched the doorknob, the wall behind him vanished entirely, revealing not the black void he had come to dread, but a rush of sensation, wind, birdsong, the scent of rain on stone. The room cracked, fractured like a shell, and light poured through. Elias was lifted not by force, but by surrender. He gave in. Not to death, not to madness, but to truth. Then darkness. When he awoke, he was in a hospital bed. Machines beeped softly nearby. A nurse stirred and called for a doctor. His body ached. His lips were dry, but he could feel them. A therapist came to see him, Dr. Lin, her face familiar in ways that twisted memory. She sat beside him and asked a question. Not how do you feel or do you know where you are, but what do you remember? Elias looked past her, to the pale walls of the hospital room. There were 4 of them. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, finally, enough. Days passed. His body recovered. Words came back. But something had changed. He no longer felt tethered to the past like a stone at his ankle. He no longer fought the silence. He welcomed it. One night, alone, he took a pen and drew a door on the hospital wall. Just an outline. He smiled. Not back. Through.